There's a theory spreading through the Pokemon community that Game Freak's new Cozy Life sim is secretly set in a dead region, and the evidence is way darker than anyone is talking about. Today, we're finding out if Kanto is actually gone. Okay, quick context for anyone who missed the news. Pokémon Pokopia is a cozy life simulation game dropping March 5th, 2026. You play as Ditto, who wakes up in a mysterious, devastated world and has to rebuild civilization alongside Pokemon. Sounds cute, right? Animal Crossing with Pokemon. Yeah, except fans have noticed something extremely unsettling. The more you look at this cozy game, the more it looks like you're not building a new world, you're rebuilding the old one. Specifically, Kanto, the original Pokemon region, and people are convinced it's been completely destroyed. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you every piece of evidence that fans are using to support this theory. We're going to examine it like actual investigators, not just hype it up for clicks. And by the end, you'll know whether this theory holds up or if the community is just seeing ghosts in every burned building because we're that desperate for Kanto nostalgia. Alright, let's build the case. First up, the Pokémon Center. In Pokopia's extended trailer, one of the very first structures you see is this completely ruined Pokémon Center. Walls crumbling, rooftop collapsed, nature taking over. Now, if you played Generation 2, you'll remember that Cinnabar Island gets absolutely wrecked by a volcano eruption between red, blue, and gold silver. The entire island is destroyed. Buildings gone. Population evacuated. But you know what structure is the only one left, mostly intact? The Pokémon Center. And here's Pokopia's showing us a ruined Pokémon Center. Same architectural style, same red roof, in the exact same condition we'd expect if this was years after that eruption. Coincidence? Let's keep going. In December 2025, CentroLeaks, who's been reliable in the past, drops a bomb. They leak Pokopia's DLC roadmap, and it includes specific area names with descriptions. Listen to these. Cinnabar area, forever sealed, dead volcano island. Viridian area, never-ending burning forest of ash. Pewter area, abandoned mine covered by rocks. Fuchsia area, dried up and unfertilized fieldland. Vermilion area, constant raining electrical harbour. Those aren't just random names, those are the exact cities from Generation 1 Kanto, and every single description sounds like something catastrophic happened. Viridian Forest, now burning forest of ash, Pewter City's famous rock tunnel, abandoned mine covered by rocks, Vermilion City's harbour, constant raining electrical harbour. This isn't subtle environmental storytelling, this is a disaster report. Okay, now we're going to get into the Pokemon themselves, and this is where it gets really dark. Pokopia introduces 3 new regional variants that seem designed to tell us something went very, very wrong here. First, Peakychu. A completely colourless Peakychu. No yellow, no red cheeks, just grey? Now what would cause a Peakychu to lose all its colour? Environmental degradation? Radiation? Volcanic ash blocking out the sun for years? The game doesn't say, but it's not great. Then there's Mosslax, a Snorlax completely covered in moss and plant growth. And here's the Pokédex entry. This Pokemon must have been asleep for a really long time. Okay, so we've got a Snorlax that's been asleep so long that an entire ecosystem grew on top of it. How long are we talking? Decades? And where in Kanto do we famously encounter a sleeping Snorlax? Oh right, everywhere. Route 12, Route 16. Snorlax are iconic to Kanto's geography. So either this is a massive coincidence, or Game Freak is showing us what happened to those Snorlax after everyone left. And finally, Smearguru. A Smeargle covered in paint splatters that look old, like weathered and faded. Smeargle is the artist Pokemon. You know where artists gather in Kanto? Vermilion City's famous fan club, Saffron City's art scene. This Smeargle looks like it's been painting in abandoned buildings for years with nobody around to see its work. That's actually really sad. Throughout the trailer, we keep seeing these little environmental details that scream Generation 1. There's a first generation Pokédex model, not the fancy Rotom Dex, not a Pokemon Go phone, but the original brick red Kanto Pokédex. There's a sign with the original Kanto font and design language. The architecture matches Generation 1's building style, not the newer regions. And here's the thing, these aren't just Easter eggs. In environmental storytelling, when you show old versions of technology, you're telling the audience this place has been abandoned for a long time. Finally, let's talk about the actual story of Pokopia. You play as a Ditto who awakens in this world. Your guide is Professor Tangrowth, and according to promotional material, Tangrowth might be the only human adjacent character you encounter at first. Where did the humans go? Why is the world abandoned? Why does a Ditto, a famous Pokemon for transforming into other things, suddenly wake up in a destroyed world where there's nothing left to copy? The game's tagline is literally about rebuilding a world where Pokemon and humans once lived together. Not currently lived, once lived, past tense. So, to recap, ruined Pokémon Center matching Cinnabar's post-eruption state, leaked map explicitly naming devastated Kanto locations, regional forms that look like survivors of an environmental catastrophe, Gen 1 artifacts suggesting decades of abandonment, and a narrative premise about rebuilding a world humans left. Yeah, I get why people think Kanto is dead. And honestly, part of me wants this theory to be true. Not because I want Kanto destroyed, I'm not a monster, but because this would be genuinely bold storytelling for Pokemon. Imagine Game Freak finally answering the question, what happened after we left? Instead of just resetting the world for the next generation, they're showing us consequences. The volcano erupted, the ecosystem collapsed, humanity couldn't sustain the region. That's dark, that's interesting. That's the kind of environmental storytelling that would make Pokemon feel mature without losing its core identity. But here's the problem with wanting a theory to be true. You start seeing evidence everywhere, even when it's not there. Alright, it's time to put on our skeptic hats, because for every piece of evidence that supports Kanto is dead, there's a question the theory can't answer. First, let's talk about how Pokemon marketing works. Game Freak loves hiding references to past games. They drop Easter eggs, visual callbacks, and nostalgic bait in every trailer because they know it drives engagement. And what happens? The community goes wild, theories explode, YouTube videos get made. Hi, that's us. And the game trends on social media for weeks. But here's the thing. Those teasers don't always mean what we think they mean. Remember when everyone thought Legends Arceus would directly connect to Diamond Pearl's storyline and explain Sirius's backstory? And then it didn't really do that? Pokemon marketing implies connections to generation hype. That doesn't mean the game delivers on those implications. So yeah, Pokopia looks like Kanto, but that could just be Game Freak saying, hey, remember this? Without really setting the game here. Okay, this is where we need to be precise about language, because the theory has two versions. Version 1. Pokopia is set in part of Kanto long after a disaster and humans evacuated. Version 2. Kanto is completely destroyed, everyone died, the region is gone forever. These are not the same claim. One is plausible, the other is apocalyptic, grim-dark fanfiction. We know from canon that Cinnabar Island was evacuated after the volcanic eruption. The Pokémon Center stayed standing. Blaine moved to the Seafoam Islands. The people left, but they didn't die. So if Pokopia is set on post-eruption Cinnabar Island, that doesn't mean Kanto is dead. It means this one island is abandoned, and now we're rebuilding it. Pallet Town could still exist. Saffron City could still be thriving. We're just not seeing them yet because the game starts in one location. That's not an apocalypse, that's just geography. Let's talk about those regional variants because I think we're over-interpreting them. Every Pokemon generation introduces regional forms. Alolan Vulpix exists because of snow. Galarian Weezing exists because of pollution. These aren't necessarily disasters, they're just adaptations to local environments. So yeah, Peakychu is colourless, but that could just mean this is what Peakychu looks like on this island, without needing a full environmental collapse explanation. Mosslax is covered in moss because it slept for a long time, but Snorlax already slept for absurdly long periods in every game. That's their whole thing. Maybe this one just had a really good nap, and nobody woke it up because there's no Pokeflute around. Or some kid with a Pokeflute annoying him. That's not proof of an apocalypse. And here's a big problem. The timeline doesn't add up. When would this even happen? Cinnabar's eruption occurs 3 to 5 years after Generation 1. We see the aftermath in Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Then we get Generation 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Pokopia would have had to be decades after Gen 2 for moss to completely cover Snorlax, for forests to turn to ash, for entire cities to be reclaimed by nature. But if that's the case, why does the Pokédex look like a Gen 1 model? Shouldn't technology have advanced? Why are the buildings in Gen 1 architectural style instead of showing evolution over time? The environmental decay suggests long time skips, but the artifact suggests frozen in Gen 1 era? Those two things contradict each other. Unless Game Freak is doing some really weird timeline stuff, which, to be fair, they might be. The evidence doesn't line up cleanly. And finally, let's address the elephant in the room. This is marketed as a cozy life simulation game. You grow crops, you befriend Pokemon, you decorate your house, you fish, you craft. Does that really sound like a game about processing grief over humanity's extinction? Like, I know Pokemon has dark Pokédex entries. Drifloon kidnaps children. Yamask used to be a human. Sure, but the actual gameplay is still fundamentally optimistic and kid-friendly. I just don't think Game Freak is going to drop a cozy farming sim where the subtext is everyone you loved is dead and you're alone forever. That's not a cozy vibe. That's The Last of Us with Pikachu. Alright, we've seen both sides. Now it's time for my verdict. I'm going to rate this theory on 2 separate axes, because lumping everything together is how misinformation spreads. Axis 1. Is Pokopia set in or near Kanto Cinnabar Island? Based on the evidence, leaked map with Kanto location names, visual similarities to Cinnabar's ruined Pokémon Center, Gen 1 artifacts, regional forms of Kanto Pokemon, I'd give this a 7.5 out of 10. The evidence is strong, the connections are too specific to be coincidental. I think it's very likely that Pokopia takes place in some part of Kanto, potentially starting on or near Cinnabar Island. But, and this is very important, set in Kanto doesn't actually mean Kanto is destroyed. It could just mean that this is one region of Kanto that was abandoned. Axis 2. Is Kanto actually dead? Did everyone die? Is the region gone forever? This is where the theory falls apart. The idea that all of Kanto is completely destroyed, that humanity died out, that this is a post-apocalyptic wasteland with no survivors, I'd give that a 2 out of 10. There is no evidence for a mass extinction. We know from canon that Cinnabar was evacuated, not eradicated. The game is marketed as cozy and optimistic, not grim dark. And the timeline doesn't support a collapse that severe. What's way more likely is Pokopia is set in part of Kanto that suffered environmental damage, probably Cinnabar Island. And your job as the player is to restore that area. Not because humanity is extinct, but because this specific location was abandoned and nature took over. That's still compelling. That's still good storytelling. It's just not the dark, everyone is dead version that's going viral. So here's my final takeaway. Pokopia is in Kanto, Cinnabar, very likely true. Kanto is completely dead and destroyed, almost certainly false. The theory is half right. The community found real evidence of a Kanto connection, but they're over-extrapolating that evidence into grimdark narratives that probably don't exist. which honestly is the most Pokemon fandom thing ever. We're so starved of mature storytelling that we'll turn "this island had a volcano" into "everyone died and civilization has collapsed." Sometimes a ruined building is just a ruined building, guys. Now here's what I'm actually excited about. If Pokopia is set in post-disaster Kanto, that means Game Freak is willing to explore what happens to regions after we leave them. That's new for Pokemon. We might get answers to questions like what happened to the Sylph Company after Team Rocket? Did Lavender Town's Pokemon Tower ever get rebuilt? Where did Cinnabar's researchers go after the eruption? And if that leaked roadmap is real, we'll eventually explore Viridian, Fuchsia, Vermilion, all of Kanto from a completely new perspective. That's way more interesting than just replaying Red and Blue again. Pokemon Day 2026 is coming up in late February. If Game Freak drops a deep dive trailer for developer interview about Pokopia's story, we'll finally know for sure. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Pokopia is set in Kanto? Do you want it to be? And how dark do you think Game Freak is actually willing to go with this story? Drop your theories in the comments. If you spotted evidence I missed, tag it with Pokopia Kanto, and I'll feature the best ones in a follow-up video. And if you're into this style of theory investigation, where we actually test claims instead of just hyping them up, hit that subscribe button, because I'm doing this for every major Pokemon theory moving forward. Next up, we're tackling the oldest theory in fandom. Is Ash in a coma? And we've got the sources you've never seen before. Until then, remember, not every ruined building is an apocalypse. Sometimes it's just Game Freak giving us nostalgia bait. But also, yeah, Pokopia is probably in Kanto, just not dead Kanto. Thanks for watching, I'll see you on the next one.